Ralph Preston. This week on Roadmap, William Lowe and I are joined by Angelia Abbott Hassan. Angelia is a certified breathwork instructor, and we're going to talk a little bit about breathing in terms of recovery. And so I thought it would be good to bring Angelia in. So William, I know you had a client that brought up this, didn't bring up the subject. You're working with a client that made you think about this subject. So why don't you start us off and tell us a little bit about that, and I'll share some of my observation experiences, and then the three of us can talk a little bit about the importance of breath. So William, tell us a little bit about the situation that made you think about the importance of breathing.
Yeah, sure thing. So this isn't just with a client who I'm working with, but it's something which I've seen with a lot of stroke survivors who I've worked with personally. And it's this idea of really learning how to relax and control your breathing when it comes to recovery after stroke. One of the things I see really common in a lot of stroke survivors is that when it comes to learning how to get back a movement or learning how to get back the strength of a movement, one of the most common things I've seen among stroke survivors is that there is a tendency for some stroke survivors, this is a minority, although I'm sure that a lot of the folks who are watching this can relate to this. There is a tendency for some stroke survivors who I've seen to hold their breath or strain a little bit excessively whenever they're trying to perform a new movement that they've gotten back after their stroke, whether this be lifting up their arm for the first time or even lifting up their leg to try to walk again, so that they're for example trying to lift up their affected leg so that it can meet their unaffected leg whenever they're walking out and about. And the reason why I want to bring this up with Ralph and talk about this in Roadmap is because I thought that this would make for a very good public service announcement, because what I've noticed with all these stroke survivors is that they can already perform the movement quite well. But when they strain and when they hold their breath in, quite often what I find is that the movement quality actually diminishes, because in recovery after stroke, what tends to happen is that your brain is already overloading the muscles with signals, and that's why muscle spasticity or muscle tightness occurs in the first place. So when you're straining, or when you're holding your breath to lift up your arm or perform a movement, yes, in some cases it might mean that you might be able to perform the movement a lot quicker, but I find that it's actually counterproductive, because quite often, in more cases than not, when you're holding your breath and straining really hard to perform a movement, what you're doing is, in a sense, you're encouraging your brain to turn on everything at once in order to perform a movement which might have only required a little bit of brain power before your stroke. So, for example, this might be the case for activities where maybe you're in a high pressure environment. For example, if you're using your affected hand to maybe pick up some grocery bags, and you're coming back from shopping, and because you want to make sure that you don't drop the grocery bags, you're holding really tight. But because you're holding really tight and you're trying to send those signals through to your brain, you're also turning everything on at the same time, rather than just relaxing and just using the optimal amount of brain power and effort that you need to actually complete the task. And I find that this can be detrimental in recovery after stroke, because recovery after stroke, essentially what you're doing is you're re-educating your brain on how to perform movements like it used to before your stroke for the rest of your life. And if you get into a situation where you're constantly straining and you're constantly holding in your breath to try and perform a movement well, what this actually does in the stroke survivors who I've coached personally, and these clients which I've worked with, is that it actually stops your brain from being able to dial into that signal and be able to send it in a optimal way, such that you are able to have a high quality movement, which is smooth and consistent. When you're straining and you're holding your breath and you're trying to perform a movement, yes, you might be able to perform the movement a lot quicker, but you're also making it a lot harder for your brain to send that signal, and your body is already fighting against itself. Well, your brain is already fighting against your body because of all the tightness. So when you're turning everything on by holding your breath, you're actually making it a lot harder to re-educate your brain on how to perform the movements you're trying to learn in a high quality way, and also in a more consistent manner. And this is why I'm a big advocate of, and this might be another subject, but this is why I'm a big advocate of quality over quantity, which is basically where I suggest to the clients I work with not to do hundreds of repetitions, but rather low repetitions of a high quality and of a consistent manner, because that way you can actually tune into your breath work and making sure that you're not tiring yourself out after the 50th repetition of a particular exercise, but rather you're able to control the way that you breathe, and you perform movements in a controlled, slow manner, so that you can really re-educate your brain on how to send those signals. Because at the end of the day, recovery after stroke is about re-educating your brain on how to send the signals to do things which you used to, and also I guess control that tension which goes on in your body after a stroke, obviously, which is caused by the muscle spasticity and muscle tightness. Now, earlier, Ralph, you and I, we were having a discussion, and you mentioned that you had some experiences about breathing, and you were a participant of Breathwork, I believe, which is why you brought Angelia here. Just wondering if you had any thoughts on anything I shared just then about some of the survivors I've worked with and what I've personally seen and observed.
Sure. I didn't know much about breath work until, and I didn't think about it much until I met Angelia, and I was to say she's done 47 breath classes, and I've attended them all. We record them and put them on YouTube. So I've learned a little bit recently. I do know a couple things through observation. Number one was, as a videographer and still photographer, I noticed after my stroke that I was holding my breath not all the time, but often when I shouldn't. It's kind of left over from sometimes when you're taking a picture, you just don't breathe, especially if you're hand holding something, because your breath makes for camera movement. So the first thing I noticed about breath in my own recovery was I had to learn to overcome my lack of breathing. And I didn't even think about it in terms of what you talked about in terms of signals or spasticity or anything. And I did kind of train myself, although occasionally I catch myself doing it to this day. I also didn't know about it much in terms when I worked with 14 local people, but I did notice that at one point or another, just about every single one of them, I would notice them straining and stop breathing, and I would tell them to breathe. Mostly, I was thinking if you don't breathe, they might pass out or fall or get hurt on my watch, and I didn't want that. And since then, I've also, in addition to working with Angelia, I've learned a fair amount about, not a fair amount, I've learned some about yoga. I don't pretend to be a yoga expert, except I've been doing it for 2.5 years myself. But a yoga teacher will tell you that you really are starting to get yoga down when you can do the moves and control your breath at the same time on top of it. As a newbie in yoga, you often you start out, often class starts out with some breathing and you're supposed to maintain it. But I'll tell you what, when you don't know the moves and you're trying to keep up with that aspect, the breath goes out the window first thing. I had a very well-known teacher who I did a private lesson with, tell me that you're truly a yogi when you can maintain the breath throughout the routine. I see Angelia nodding. She knows so much more about breath than I do. So rather than me try and be the expert, let's let the expert tell us a little bit about why she thinks breath is important.
Oh, where do I start? Well, let's start with how we stay alive, right? It takes oxygen for us to maintain vitality of any sort. So the first thing we do whenever we're born is we take a nice big breath of oxygen, right? And that begins this beautiful cascade of responses within our body. But and the last thing we do whenever we're getting ready to pass on is we exhale. So it's all directly connected to the breath. You know, you all know I experienced a stroke, and when I experienced the stroke, it left me in such a state of cloud. Like I felt like I was living in this cloud. So I couldn't figure out how to get this cloud to dissipate. And I landed into this breath class. It was actually a trauma yoga class. And I was learning about trauma and the impact of trauma on the body and the body systems. And I discovered I couldn't move my body. I started simply by breathing. And I discovered very quickly that breath was changing everything. I was nearly 2.5 years into my healing and dove into a formal breath practice of my own just to test this theory. And eventually I got my eyesight back. I began to have movement. I regained use and function of the one side of my body. Now I have dove into learning all of what I can about breath. And from what I have been educated on is when you experience a traumatic event, say a stroke, it leaves your body in a state of tensity. It leaves your body in a state of miscommunication, and you're not necessarily working a mechanical system properly, which I don't even think that most of us really think about it, because breathing is such an automatic function for our bodies that we do it without thought. And without thought, our bodies don't understand that we're breathing incorrectly. Now, I would say whether you had a stroke or not, probably 95% of humankind are breathing incorrectly. And that is evident to me because of the evolutionary changes that have occurred within our skull structure. And our skull structure has all began to kind of concave in. Our airways are smaller now, so our bodies are working harder to maintain a balance of oxygen, to maintain a balance of pH in our body systems, and to maintain a balance of acidity within our body systems. We breathe on an average 24,000 times a day. So when you have a stroke, your body is already in a state of trauma. It's tense. It's not functioning the right way. It's taking a lot of energy just to do small movements. And because the energy that's being expelled, and the reason why you had a stroke usually has something to do with the lack thereof of oxygen within your body system, therefore typically causing problems within the bloodstream, problems getting backed up, problems like I know there's many reasons to have a stroke, but I know lack of oxygen is a major factor in this. So if you think about breathing that many times every single day, and the fact that we're doing this unconsciously lets me to believe that some of us are just mouth breathing without really realizing that we're mouth breathing, which is a way to stay alive. simply by opening up your mouth and breathing in some fresh oxygen, but you're also not getting filtered oxygen. Your oxygen is not being warmed by the body's natural warming system. So I always recommend to people to breathe through their nose. The nose is your number one filter. We got to use it to keep our bodies pure and clean. Purified air is what our bodies are craving. And that oxygen goes into your body. It helps supply oxygen to the glucose. Without oxygen in your glucose from your food, it won't have a combustion and get into the cells. That combustion, once the oxygen and the glucose meets, has to happen in order for the cells to be able to absorb the glucose, the oxygenated glucose. These things are a necessity whenever you have a stroke. Without breath, well, actually, let me start with this. A body is a mechanical system. The bodies that we all live in work in a mechanical function, and they have a bunch of different systems that layer up within them. Now, this mechanical system, I like to call breath the key, the communicator within this mechanical system that does not communicate via any language that any human being could understand. So being able to tap back into a disconnected body after a stroke takes a mechanical action to cause a physiological change inside of the body's communication system. The only way that you're going to be able to tap into communicating with a healing body is through mechanically supplying a little bit extra oxygen into it. And that extra oxygen in a body that is in a state of dysbiosis, a state of illness, is everything. It helps lower the blood pressure. It helps get your blood fluids moving. It helps drain out your lymphatic system. It helps pull waste from your body and actually get it moving within your body, allowing for blood flow to reach areas that are blocked off by neuro messages. And the bonus, for my particular path was the fact that I started this breath, and therefore it led me into being able to gain subtle changes. And the deeper I got into practicing breath, the more subtle changes kept adding up. Now, I'm not saying breathing is for everybody, because I don't necessarily believe that. I think that people can find these kinds of reconnections inside of their body through other modalities. But for me, breathing is everything. It has allowed me to reset and soothe my damaged central nervous system as I have navigated through the healing journey after stroke.
I found I've been, like I said, I've been doing the breath classes with Angelia. I found a couple of things. Number one, after about 10 or 12 weeks, just like in yoga, when I was, as I did yoga, I just noticed very subtle differences in flexibility. Well, I also noticed very subtle differences in breathing and in other things. The first thing I noticed was when my phone said one day, your nighttime breathing rate is decreased by 14%, which meant I was breathing deeper and better in that. Otherwise, I couldn't, if I'm still breathing as shallow as most of us do, I wouldn't be able to slow it down 14% because you wouldn't be getting oxygen. So that was the first thing. And then we had some discussions in one of the Zoom meetings about blood pressure. And so I just decided one night I'd gotten my blood pressure cuff out because I hadn't been taken in a week or so. And I said, you really need to do this. So I got it out. Now, well, this is how it happened. I've also found breath work is really good right before bed. Typically, I try and practice a little bit every day, 5-10 minutes. And one of the things that I ended up doing, because I'm busy a lot and work late, was I found that I could sit down and do a little bit of breath work, and it would help me unwind, and so that I could actually go to bed and sleep instead of just go to bed and lay down and awake. And so I had my blood pressure cuff out, and it was shortly before bed, and I decided I would try breathing with the blood pressure cuff on, and I was kind of surprised. I figured it would have a positive effect, but both my diastolic and systolic numbers went down between 20 and 25%. I mean, 20 and 25 points from fairly normal, from it was like 135 over 80 something. They went down to like 110 over 72, something like that, something that you'd really like to have. I did screen grabs, I don't remember the numbers. But I was kind of impressed at that. So, so of course I put the 4 graphics in a quad split and posted them because, it's not science. I mean, I guess it's scientific. Be more scientific if you tested a whole bunch of people. But to make a long story short, I found that just like doing yoga, that the breath work has been beneficial to me. Another thing is if you're going throughout your day and something's stressing you out, it's kind of almost, well, it is a form of meditation, I suppose, because we use that word almost every week in breath class. So if you're all stressed out, go sit in the corner and close your eyes and do a little breathing. You'd be surprised what it would do for you. I'm sure, Angelia, you got a lot more that you can add on any of those subjects, but that's
definitely. Oh, I'm sorry, Ralph. I didn't mean to interrupt, but definitely just to expand a little bit, when the mind overtakes the body, it takes a mechanical action to disconnect that override through your parasympathetic and sympathetic. So if you get yourself lost into a stress state, into an overthinking state, or like an overtension, in your body, that tightness that can rise up, that heat that can come up from the lower part of your body and rise up through your chest. And I'm sure that there are going to be plenty of people that understand what I'm talking about. That is your body's sympathetic response inside of your body systems, tensing up, telling your muscles we're in fight mode. And so those muscles start secreting all kinds of things to get themselves prepped and ready to get ready for fighting, And in that process, to switch back to a parasympathetic rest and digest and calm and peaceful part of your body, it takes that mechanical action of breathing deeply into the diaphragm, engaging the diaphragmatic muscles, moving the entire body systems, because as soon as you engage those diaphragmatic muscles, it pushes your diaphragm down into the rest of your body, all the way down into like your intestines area, and it engages that peristalsis. That's it's like a stimulation, or like it's almost like stimulates. That's the word I'm looking for. It stimulates that movement within your whole body. Breath work is very powerful. And I want to point out too on this that choosing the right type of breath work for the state that you are existing inside of your body systems is really important. Understanding how your body is breathing is also really important. And it just takes some awareness, sometimes some putting your hand on top of your chest, maybe on your belly, and breathing in naturally just to feel where this air is moving into, and asking yourself things like, am I a shallow breather? Am I breathing into my chest? Am I breathing into my body? Where is this oxygen going whenever I'm breathing? You know, out of those 24,000 breaths that we take every day, I myself certainly would like to come along beside them and help influence that communication inside of my body. And I influence that communication inside of my body through hugging my body a little bit deeper with engagement of the diaphragm, breathing in a little bit more oxygen, and extending out the exhale. I tell everybody, if you want to practice breath, the best way to start it is to breathe in to a count. Some people, if you can breathe into a count of 2, that's where you start. Some people, if you could breathe into a count of 4, that's where you start. Some people, if you could breathe into a count of 6, that's optimal. You really want to have an inhale of a count of 6 and an exhale of a count of 8 to 10. Your exhale, extending that exhale out and bringing that inhale to a count of 6 is really an optimal balance of oxygen and carbon dioxide. It allows for your pH levels to stay effective. It allows for the acidity inside of your body to stay balanced. It allows for you to have a key to shift in and out of that parasympathetic, sympathetic response, that innate response that we have inside of our bodies. So
I was just going to say, I was going to wait till you were done, but I was going to ask you if, I was just connecting the dots here with what William was saying, and made me think, I didn't use breath in any way when I was doing my recovery type exercises. You're actively engaged in recovery and recovery exercises every day and in breathing. So just this conversation made me think about, is there some kind of way that you can breathe while you're doing your physical therapy that would help alleviate the issues that William's talking about, we're originally talking about holding your breath, but it seems to me maybe there's some way that you could use breath to make sure that you're not oversending signals. I didn't know if that was something that I would suspect, knowing you, that it's something that you might be experimenting with in your recovery.
yes, I have, and I do experiment with all different kinds of things. This particular thing is so funny that you say that too, because my physiotherapist often looks at me and says, "You're forgetting to breathe." I find it to be quite humorous. And I find myself doing that when I'm in the middle of these like really challenging movements. And it's just kind of hilarious that he has to tell the breath lady to remember to breathe. So anyhow, I have found through practicing different breaths as I challenge my healing journey that when I'm doing a movement, it is best for me to exhale out on the resistance and inhale in on the calm part of it, if that makes sense. So when I'm like trying to lift my arm, I exhale out. And I find that neuro connection it's smoother. It feels more natural. So that's the way that I choose to practice. After practicing a few different styles, I've tried a few different styles to determine what works best for me. And I think that that's a practice that really comes in key for this particular, for breath, period, because breath really is about designing a practice that works for your particular body. Right now, I'm in the middle of a new experiment that I'm trying where I'm taping my mouth closed every night when I go to bed. And this is so fascinating. I started this about 2 weeks ago, and I'm running a full month. And I noticed about 2 days, 3 days in that my sleep had improved. Like, I would typically wake up once, maybe even twice a night.
Okay, so we got the internet decided that it would cut us off for a sec, so
Yes, it did.
so we're back, and Angelia, I'll just have to edit this together, but I was thinking that what William was talking about and what I observed was typically people take this big breath in when they raise their hand or do the motion, and something as simple as reversing that to where you breathe out kind of gets rid of that whole thing about taking this big breath while you lift or move or whatever, and then holding your breath. Because if you breathe out while you're doing it, guess what? Pretty soon you're going to want to breathe in again.
Mm-hmm.
So, well, I know William needs to run along, and we could probably talk about this for another hour. But maybe we'll wrap it up, and if we all want to revisit it sometime, we could do that. So I guess, Angelia, I want to thank you for coming in and sharing some of your knowledge, because I know you have more than you shared today, and I think it was pretty insightful. Just the one thing about try breathing out when you're doing your therapy on the strain part, because like I said, and what William was describing was people were taking a big breath in and when they moved and then holding that breath. So that's a real simple takeaway. So I guess well, I thank you, Angelia, thank you, and William, thank you. Unless anybody's got anything else, I guess we'll wrap this up and see everybody next time on Roadmap.